WLRN Video presents.
Welcome to another WLRN extended interview. I'm April No. On June 23, 2021, Thistle sat down with Angela Wild, a lesbian feminist activist, a political artist, and a writer. She's one of the founding members of the lesbian activist group Get the L Out UK, author of the first research on the cotton ceiling, Lesbians at Ground Zero, and the creator of Wild Women Workshop, radical feminist shop for activists. And now, please enjoy this presentation of the full interview.
So this month's show is focusing in on Pride, which, you know, is every June we see a rainbow unicorn kind of like throw up on the pavement. And and so it's like it calls for a response, and in this case a lesbian response. And the solution to lesbian erasure is lesbian visibility, right? So
absolutely.
and you're all about that. But before we start talking about lesbian visibility and pride and responses to the male-dominated pride, can you just tell us where you're from, where you live, how you got involved with radical feminist activism, and just a little bit about your background?
Yeah, okay. So I'm maybe my accent will tell you I'm French. I was raised in a very posh, like, you know, traditional rather area of France where there was no lesbian visibility at all. I mean, I'm sure there were lesbians, but I didn't see them, and I actually never met a lesbian before the age of 25. So it's been it's been a long journey to be able to call myself a lesbian in this context. I've known like a lot of anti-lesbian sentiment very early as well, so that didn't help. I became a feminist about a while ago, maybe 20 years ago, and I started writing but didn't really meet a community before I moved to London, and then I started direct action, and I absolutely fell in love with direct action. It's really my thing. And at first I was really involved in the anti-pornography, anti-prostitution thing, protest, and it was really something that, you know, came from my own experience of having been exposed to pornography very young, and I needed to find answers and also fight it because I could see how damaging it had been, and it was, and it still is. And then I became more and more radical in my thinking, and then the trans activist issue became visible to me in 2012, where I was involved in organizing a radical feminist conference alongside Julia Long, alongside Leanne Timmerman. There were quite a lot of women in there, and it was a woman-only conference. It was called RadFem 12, and it was going to talk about transgenderism from a political perspective, and it was the first time I really heard about it. And we were picketed, and we were deplatformed, and we were silenced. We had to change the venue, and then it was also the first time I was involved in a women-only space. And I never experienced it before. And then, you know, all together at that moment, it was like everything made sense. You know, like, you can't have a woman-only space. It's men who call themselves women who are blocking you, not MRAs, you know, just men who say they are women. And I just thought, wow, it's got to be so powerful to create and to want to be in a woman-only space that they actually don't let us do it. And there is all the stuff about transgenderism, and it just kind of blew my mind that it was such an important thing to do. So since then, I became not only a lesbian, but a lesbian involved in activism and fighting for women-only space, and lesbian visibility has become a big topic for me.
Where was the RadFem 12 conference held?
That was in London.
In London in 2012.
Yeah. 2012.
And Julia Long was a part of that?
Yes,
it was picketed. Was it? I've never heard of it. The first radical feminist conference that I heard of was about in a different voice, or what was it called? It was like hearing different voices or
Speaking differently, yes. That was a
speaking
few years
differently.
after,
Speaking,
yeah.
that was 2016, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
So there was this one in 2012.
Yes. So
And
already in 2012, there were already kind of a movement that was kind of emerging. And I think these kind of early conferences, they really gave a ground for, I don't know, maybe that's why in the UK we've been able to move, because there was quite a lot already of women speaking about this.
yeah, and you were able to go forward with the conference, even though it
Yeah.
was ticketed and whatnot. And okay, great. And then fast forwarding to more recently, the organization Get the L Out was recently formed, and you were part of creating that. Can you talk about what was the impetus for the formation of that group?
Well, it was really not an impetus for formation of a group, actually. We were just planning an action. The context for this was in the UK.
And we was just a group of friends.
Yeah. But
Mhm.
at the beginning, if you want, there was an emerging gender critical movement in the UK, and they were doing a good job in kind of bringing issues forward as much as they could, but there was just not like there was no lesbian visibility there. And we thought, first of all, that lesbians issue are really important. I think they are very central in this fight, and they are also the ones that have been for us. I mean, we've been affected for years. I mean, the history of the Michigan Women's Festival. We know Janice Raymond. It's the same here. I live in Wales. There was a women-only music festival that lasted for 40 years, and that got that stopped in the same kind of context as the Michigan Festival as well. So we've known these stories. I mean, I'm in contact with some lesbians who tell me that in the 90s they lost all their lesbian community through the transitioning of all their groups, all their lovers, all their friends. And I'm like, all this has gone absolutely unnoticed from the mainstream, from the straight world, from the normal feminist movement. Even the gender critical movement do not talk about it. So we thought, wow, there's really something happening. We need to bring the lesbian issue forward. We just
And completely separate from the GBT.
and absolutely, yes. Well,
Right.
against actually, as an opposition to it, because we knew also we have this understanding that gay men in the GBT are not only not our allies, they are the one who facilitated the trans takeover. They don't really think beyond, does it give me an erection? That's where it starts and ends with their politics. So unfortunately, we just knew that we were not able to discuss.
So that's interesting. Not only is it separatist, it's also in opposition. And can you talk a little bit more about that? Because the group Get the L Out, in conjunction maybe with some other groups, have done these oppositional direct actions at Pride events.
Yeah.
Who had that idea? How did you organize those?
Yeah.
How have those gone? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to say that we saw the action that Renee and Charlie organized in New Zealand, in Auckland. And they basically the same year marched in front of their local Pride in Auckland with a banner that said something about protecting lesbian youth in the trans context. And we were like, wow.
It said something like, don't give lesbians hormones or
yes.
something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. And I was like, wow, they survived to tell the tale. Like, this is an amazing stuff to do. Maybe we could do something similar. And Sarah, who is also and Get the Hell Out, had the same idea pretty much at the same time. So naturally we talked, and then Leanne joined us, and then we started planning, and then we talked about it, and then women joined us. The idea was not to protest Pride. In fact, I know it's often portrayed in that way, but it was not a protest as in we were not discussing with Pride in London or the LGBT community. It was using the platform that was available to show some lesbian visibility, to show women in the LGBT community, or maybe that were questioning what was going on, or maybe even that knew there was a problem, to show that there was some voices of dissent, and to show just lesbian visibility, because there's no lesbians at Pride at all. So, it's really a male-led stuff. There's been a few research saying that most lesbians don't go.
the first time you did this, Get the L Out, direct action protests at a Pride event in London was 2019 or was it
2018.
2018?
Yes.
Okay, and you got a lot of
before that,
attention. You got a lot of attention, and one of the slogans was "Trans activism erases lesbians," right?
yeah.
I thought that was a very clever use of words. Can you talk about that slogan and how you came up with it at all? Or?
I thought it was important to name transgenderism as an ideology, so it's not like I didn't want it to be like trans activists or something. It would have been too easily targeted, but transgenderism frames it as, you know, the genderist movement.
Right, and activism, I think the term was trans activism.
Yes.
Trans activism erases
That's
lesbian.
right, yeah.
Or erases lesbianism. I saw in one of the newspaper articles that you sent me too.
And it was quite stressful to name it so plainly. You know, we were kind of discussing how much can we say, but you know, I thought, well, you know, we're going to jump in front of Pride, so might as well be as open as possible, you know. So that was the idea. It was painted here in the studio.
Right, and so, I mean, Get the L Out. The name says it all, and yet there you are jumping into the Pride Parade because, in a sense, we want the T out, right? I mean, or do you see any value in LGB coming together, or do you think it just needs to be the L is its own thing entirely?
I think we're not to remove the T. The GBT can do whatever they like. I think the L doesn't belong, and I think the fact that you see the rise of transgenderism, I mean, actually the tsunami of transgenderism, the takeover, is a result of gay men's politics that have ignored, dismissed lesbians from the beginning. You know, from the beginning, lesbians' issues are not seen as important, they are not seen as central, they are dismissed and so on. And so you get to that point where lesbians are like, something is happening with us and no one cares. And this is led by the fact that it's a men-led movement. It's not about gay, really make a difference. It's just men.
You're protesting the male domination of the LGBT movement, and you're in opposition to that male domination in the sense that you're going to crash their party, and yet where lesbians to be visible, that's the goal, to be visible, but you don't want to be in the LGBT.
No, I think it was more to highlight almost the irony that they put the L in their slogan first, but yet, you know, they don't listen to lesbian issues, they don't display any lesbian, you know, there's no lesbians in there, you know, visibly. I mean, no, on the website on that year, there was maybe one picture of a woman, everybody else was male. It was really telling. So it was to highlight that and to show, actually, you know, let's show ourselves, this is what a lesbian look like.
Mm-hmm. And then also in the UK, Izzy, what's her last name? Izzy Belstaff, is that her?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She organized a lesbian visibility march.
Yes.
that was meant for lesbians only, and that was crashed by trans activists. And it was interesting to see how, wasn't it the police that kept them physically distant, and so they didn't actually get to do what you did at the Pride Parade, which is you put yourself in the very front of it. These trans activists were not able to do that at the Lesbian Visibility March that she organized.
So it was a lesbian strength march.
Lesbian strength, yes, lesbian strength.
It's organized by a collective which Izzy is part of, and yes, there was a big contingent of trans activists. I have to say the police was not that great on that day.
They weren't.
No, and we had a line of women between them and the march, and they were constantly advancing. It was quite threatening. They were all right at the rally, but during the march it was terrible. I don't think they would have allowed. I mean, imagine, you know, if you had an anti-racist protest and then a racist protest on the same day, following each other, they would never have allowed that. And these people kind of claimed that they were part of us, and I think the police was a bit kind of unclear. But it
And
was
what year was that? That was 2018 or 2019?
it was after, and I think that was 19.
19.
Yes, there wasn't one
Okay.
last year, and there will be one next year. There will be one in
Mhm.
September, I think. Yeah.
Are there some examples in the UK of where the police do cooperate with the lesbians and the women and protect the lesbians and women from the trans activists? Are there any examples of that?
For us, for example, for our action, when we did what we did, we were protected. We were protected because of the way we strategized. We marched at the front. So we were not protected by the police as such. We were protected by the visibility. The press was there. So it's a really bad look to have lesbian battered on a pride march. So they had to protect us. But apart from that, I'm not quite sure I've seen any examples. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that I feel like as time marches on, that'll be interesting to see how it unfolds because, as you know, we had a speaking event in Seattle
Yeah.
and the police were highly involved in that because trans activists were very visible and very organizing to crash our event. It was organized by Wolf, and it was a series of speakers. And the Seattle police were helpful,
All right.
and I feel like that kind of set a precedent,
Absolutely.
which is a good one to set. So I was just wondering how it's been over there. And
I think it really depends on the location, the kind of flavor the police takes at any given place, the relationship that you can have with the police when you organize. I think it's very, very different from city to city, to be honest, even in the UK.
yeah. All right, so let's, instead of talking about opposing patriarchy, and these oppositional direct actions at pride marches, let's talk about women's culture and
Hmm.
the Wild Woman Workshop and what that is, and your vision of how women can create maybe our own society separate from male dominated society. And maybe are you participating in some examples of that?
Yeah, I just reframe a bit what you said, because we don't see our action as protesting or being against. We see them as showing visibility, and I want to just mention that since we've done that, we've had countless examples of women saying, "I became a lesbian after. I mean, I called myself a lesbian after the march. I called myself gender critical after the march." The fact that they've seen a lesbian sometime for the first time is creating women's culture. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not about confronting them for the sake of it. That's just an excuse. Really, what we want is to get women to see what a lesbian is like, and just raise some awareness in that very simple way, just by showing up.
Thank you for that clarification. No, thank you for that clarification, because the little clip that I saw was, it seemed very confrontational. And I do think that there are some confrontation, at least over here in the US at these pride marches when lesbians have gone. Not
Yeah.
that the lesbians are confrontational, but there's tension and there's
Very, but I
pushback,
think it's
you
really important how we as activists we focus it, because yes, you show it's a performance, you show a confrontation, but at the same time you show yourself. And this action were always aimed at women. As I said, we were not aiming to have a conversation with Pride. We were just aiming to have a conversation with women through being there. So yeah, so women's culture. Oh, where do I start? I think it's really good to protest and be against, but I think we have to be for something too. Like, what are we fighting for? What is this vision of a feminist future we want to create? How do we want to live? I, for me, like, the artistic side of my work is really about, about that aspect of idealism, maybe some people call it, but I don't think it is. I think it's a really good way to project what we want. So in my work, I do some confrontational stuff, but I also do something that are much more women-centered, women culture, lesbian culture. Like, I live as much as possible according to separatist principle for my own sanity and safety.
Yeah. And that can mean, I mean, it's like, do you see women on a regular basis physically? I mean, we're just coming out of COVID,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But having a separatist space can be in your own apartment, if you know, with just putting up images of women on the walls and hearing women's music and, you know, creating a safe haven. That can be a separation from male culture
yeah.
and doesn't require women living together in the woods, which
No,
is a
yeah.
fantastic experience, but
Mm.
you know, we're living in big cities. Where you live is in an urban area?
Not at all. I live in a really, really small village in
Oh,
the
okay.
west of the UK in Wales, and it has a decent lesbian community. It's quite nice. I haven't seen like a lot of women on a regular basis because of COVID, but I know there is kind of a network, like there's a good knot here. But I really agree with what you say about the culture. I'm really aware of, like, you know, when you eat, you're going to be careful about what you put in your body, right? And, you know, culturally it's the same. You've got to be careful about what you put in your head. And I mean, I've always like never really watched the news since very young. I found them so distressing. I can't. So I quite like to have this distance with the mainstream as well. I'm not saying I'm kind of zero, not listening to any men's music. I mean, you know, it's not true. But I'm aware of the potential of colonization through the media very, very accurately. And I think maybe because I've always been a visual artist, I've been very aware of the power of images on us, and
Mm-hmm.
that the patriarchy is a big propaganda machine and they own the media and so on. And so it's really all the more important to create our alternative visual music, of course, you know, like everything. And I really enjoy that at the moment. I see some sort of renewal of that. I don't think it's ever gone away, but it looks kind of, it's picking up again, and it's really quite positive.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just in the UK either. I feel that there's a big wave happening in the United States right now, and this summer, because due in part to us all being isolated and socially distant and on lockdown for over a year and all last summer, and everything being canceled. I feel like women just really want to see each other, and so it's going to be quite. And then we also have the tool of all these Zoom meetings
Oh, yes,
and
yeah.
ways of communicating online now too, that we've honed over this past year. So that, in combination with meeting in person, I think creates the conditions for culture and art to really
Yeah.
start cross-pollinating and surging. And talk about your art. You're a visual artist. You also are a wordsmith. You're a writer. When
I'm
you
not a wordsmith. What is a wordsmith?
uh, somebody who knows how to string words together well.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Um, but the visual art that you do, the images, can you talk a little bit about the inspiration and what kinds of images you create?
Oh, that's interesting. I rarely speak about this, you know. First of all, I want to say I don't really have a medium of choice. It really depends on what's available, what is the problem I want to talk about, and so on. And a lot of the things I have never shown actually. So, for example, when I had issues with when I still lived in London and I had real tensions around the housing. You know, housing in London is a really big problem. And I was really scared of being homeless. I dreamed about women-only spaces. I was like, I just need a safe space where I can just be. And I started building, for example, these little tiny lands. So, you know, they were built with whatever I could find. And then I made this big sculpture made of the shape of a body of a woman that was an island. And I called it Women's Land. And it was just like, you know, what my brain was, how can I say it? Like, I don't plan anything. It's just I play, and then at some point a theme emerges that is relevant to me, and that was really like at some point a very, very important thing, because I didn't have such a place, and it was a three-dimensional work because I had access to a studio suddenly when I moved here, and it just exploded. It was great. I did some work around motherhood that was purely graphic design, and that was when I had my child, and I experienced a lot of trauma around this, and I did an exhibition around motherhood that was about showing the truth about motherhood in terms of statistics in the UK, in terms of discrimination, postnatal depression, suicide rate and these kind of things, but all in a very pink way, with a lot of bunting and a lot of cupcakes, in a way to show the contrast between what patriarchy tells you motherhood is going to be. It's going to be great, you're going to love your child, it's a bundle of joy, it's wonderful. And actually the reality is that, women lose their job, women are in postnatal depression for years, women commit suicide at a really incredible rate because it's just so hard. And I did this on my computer because I didn't at the time have a studio space, and I couldn't access anything else, and I didn't have time as well. So that's the kind of stuff I've been doing. I've got a few projects coming, but I can't yet tell you about it.
Cool. And in terms of women getting together and creating women's art and women's culture, does Get the L Out or any of the organizations, the political organizations that you're a part of, the Me Too, Lesbians Me Too, is there an aspect of women creating art together, slogans, stickers, images?
No, not really. No, not really. Because we are so small in terms of group, and because we also are very disorganized and chaotic, it kind of gets done really quickly, and we don't have, and also because we don't have the facilities in terms of space, and because we live very, very remotely, and it's not like kind of a place where I could run workshops and things like that.
The banner that you have behind you, is that your original design?
Yes.
And it's beautiful, and I could see that being held at a march in the streets,
Yes.
And so that's what I'm imagining, that some of our culture that we create this summer, next summer, and as we just keep building our movement, is maybe we can carve out spaces for women to have workshops. I've been part of, male-dominated activist projects, where here in the States, like we were talking about before, it's actually 1999, the Battle of Seattle, where they rented out huge warehouse spaces, and they had huge banners, and people were painting them, and it was so creative, and there was so much energy. And then once those works of art went out on the streets, it's like, whose streets? Our streets. It's you felt like you really were taking over the city, and well, in fact, that kind of happened in 1999. And so doing that in the women's movement, using that art, and that communal art, like in a warehouse space with all of the supplies, all the paints, all the canvases, all of the logistics taken care of through fundraising ahead of time and stuff. Gosh, I hope we get there, I
mean, I know some women who do this in the north of England, that they have been some workshops like that. For me, when I lived in London, it was just so unaffordable. I think this is really a big issue of space. To have a studio in the center of London is, it's just not practical. It's impossible for women to afford it, which is one of the reasons I live here. But yeah, we do have no room of our own. Still, we still are very restricted by these kind of very practical issues. But yes, I think it is wonderful.
And I'm describing something, I feel like such an ugly American right now. It's like big, puppets. Huge banners, a warehouse. It doesn't have to be like that. It can just,
it doesn't have to.
Just women getting together and using our hands to create an art piece like the one that's behind you is, and I know you did that, but maybe giving a sister a paintbrush and she could paint in the red after. I love communal art. I love art as culture and art as a way of communication
Absolutely. Yeah.
and, participation. And I feel like that can happen in women's spaces that helps us to be bonded to one another and then more powerful.
This is why women's gatherings are so important, because it is in this kind of place that this can happen, and this is also why they're banned, because in this kind of place all kind of magic can happen. But yeah, create women-only spaces. Women, come on.
Yeah.
More gatherings, please.
Definitely online and off, because one thing I've discovered this past year of going into social isolation and to the lockdown and stuff is, I feel really connected to you, and I'm really it's amazing. Like, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. We had no internet. You couldn't, it was, and my parents, I didn't tell you this before, but I lived in England for 2 years. I lived in Cambridge.
Oh,
Yeah, I
wow.
lived in Cambridge. And so I actually learned how to speak from age 2 to 4, and I had a British accent. I don't know how to put it on anymore, but
You are listening to WLRN.
but just women getting together in real life spaces and how powerful that is, and how it's so simple and yet it's so powerful that it's banned, like it's just so impossible, and yet I think we're doing it.
Yes.
Oh, and getting online and being able, back then, how we couldn't connect like this.
No.
I remember, because when we moved back to the States, we would have this elaborate process of being able to talk to people in the UK on the telephone, and it was like such a huge deal, and there was an echo, and and now look at us. Like, I can see you and look you in the eye. Not totally in the eye, but it's problematic, though, as modern technology always seems to be problematic in some ways. Environmentally, the internet uses a lot of energy, and then there's all these cords under the ocean that, like, the waves, and it disturbs the ecosystems and things like that. And so I don't know, but I'm really grateful that we do get to, in this period of time, and who knows how, this window of time, who knows how long it'll last.
Yeah, I think one thing we don't talk about a lot is like isolation, and women are very isolated, and we know lesbians are also very isolated. And I was quite reluctant with Zoom at the beginning. I was like, I don't want to spend more time on the internet at the beginning of lockdown last year. But I have to say, it's been really it's changed, I think, the face of the movement we're in.
And for everyone, because everyone had the lockdown, so it's changed the trans activist movement as well. I have not been seeing as many trans activist organizing type efforts online for actions in the streets and stuff as I did before COVID. Am I missing something, or
That's true.
how has the trans activist movement
I think
changed since
they've been
COVID?
really active. In the UK, they've been really active in terms of trying to push legislation, I think what they do is they try to change mentalities or changing the law or both, and they have been active doing that. But saying that, so have, women been really active in terms of court cases and things like this in the UK. Things have dramatically changed in the last maybe month.
I have a question about this year, 2021 Pride, and you may not be able to talk. I know you can't talk about any sort of action that you may or may not be a part of, but have there been any outward, since COVID, Pride parades on the streets, and how have those gone?
There will be some.
There will be some. They're scheduled for the future. Okay.
So there are some in different countries. We know there are some happening in France, in Germany. There will be some in London in September. But I don't think there was anything big or I've missed.
Okay.
And yes, of course, if you are in the vicinity of a Pride March, please go and bring your lesbian banner, and
You know what? I went to the Pride March in Milwaukee. I don't know, it was like maybe 5 years ago. And all I had, do you remember Laverne and Shirley, the TV show? I don't know if you ever watched that. It's
No,
an
no.
American TV show. It's these two women that are roommates in Milwaukee and Wisconsin.
Mm.
And they work at a beer factory. Anyway, so Laverne was the name of one of the women, and she had an L, like this. The L sort of lends itself to that really loopy cursive L, and she had it on her leather jacket. And it took place in the 1950s. This show,
Right, yeah.
and so I had an L like that on just this little sign, and it was in Milwaukee, and it was just me. I just had my L, and I'm just walking along. Nobody messed with me, you know, and it just, so yeah, you know.
But you know, I mean, you were asking about the shop, and one of the reason I started doing this kind of, I see it as activism as well, you know, is I used to go to a lot of marches before I was a full-on feminist, and they were, you know, mixed marches, obviously. And everybody had a picture of, you know, like some sort of socialist hero, like say Che Guevara, or, you know, and I was like, where are the women? Like, why are they not T-shirt with some feminist, you know, icons on them? What? There was absolutely nothing. No, and you couldn't find a badge for, like, you know, it's crazy if you think how rich the 70s and 80s were in terms of this production of feminist culture or women's culture. And then when I started, there was nothing. I did it because I couldn't find it for myself, to be honest. Like, where are the badges? Ah!
Yeah. And now you sell badges on the Wild Women Workshop website.
Yes.
Yes, with a Y. And you have so many different slogans and designs. It's like you can spend a lot of time on your website looking at all of the.
It's so much fun to make, you know, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to try and make a badge and like, oh, I like this slogan, I'm gonna make a badge, and then see, you know.
Yeah, and you made one with my slogan.
I did.
Yeah, this slogan, and you know what? It's got like little pieces of, it's got dust on it now because this was back in 2017. Let's see.
Yes, trans activism is misogyny. You know that your sign that you've traveled the world with, I held it in London. There's a picture of me somewhere.
You had it?
Yeah.
You know, I'm so sad that just fizzled out and that there's no documentation of it on the internet anymore. Because that was kind of cool. That made me feel, because I was like, you know, right then in that moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was cool. When I ordered something else, I didn't even order this.
No, I know.
and you just put it in there, and I was like, oh, I'm visible. I am somebody. You know, it was great.
I thought it was really great action of actually. So you know, the sending your board everywhere and every woman holding it. I just thought it was really.
Thank
great.
you for remembering that. It was called
Brilliant.
I think it was called the Sisterhood Solidarity Project, and it was a couple of women on the East Coast that were organizing it, and then it got, I don't know, things sometimes happen in our women's movement where people don't get along and something happened and I don't even know what it is, and then boom, it was over. Yeah, so that was sad, but I still have the sign and I bring it to the WLRN tabling whenever I'm at a festival, and I've got my WLRN
journey. It came back to you after all this journey.
It came back and it's tattered and it's so cool. I love it.
You've got to keep it, because this, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm an archivist. Every time there's kind of a flyer, a lesbian thing happening, I'm like, I want it for the archive, because we know lesbian erasure happened in our lifetime. And this is, I think this is what you're experiencing with the thing. We have to archive everything we do, because, you know, in 100 years, there'll be lesbian looking for us.
Yeah, awesome. So are there any other projects that you're working on that you want to share with the WLRN audience, which is primarily lesbian and radical feminists from the United States, primarily?
Yes. So a lot of the activists we've done about Get the Hell Out there's been about the transitioning of lesbians, obviously, and this has been really picked on by a lot of other groups. So it's great. It's, it's not sorted, but it's getting talked about. The thing that doesn't get talked about much is the cotton sealing. Rape victims generally don't get a lot of attention, and when they're lesbian, I think it's even more difficult. So I did write a report, the Lesbian at Ground Zero, in 2019, and then if you're just not constantly banging on about it, it's the same. It kind of goes whoop. Nobody else talks about it. So we've started a website called Lesbian Me Too. And what we are trying to do with this website is, first of all, address lesbian erasure, because we've got this feeling, they've got this feeling that lesbians are not really oppressed. The thing is, because we never talk, nobody talks about lesbians, so we don't talk about lesbian oppression and lesbian erasure and lesbian discrimination or anything. So the aim is to show that there is a specific type of violence against lesbian we have to talk about. So we encourage lesbians to report their stories of sexual violence or of violence. So it's not like super happy, but it's really important, I think, that this kind of stories get recorded and get done. And also, because the cotton sealing, even though we work to talk about this, we still get told by the LGBT, by the GBT, that it's a myth, that it doesn't exist. They tell us to suck, their dicks, but then they tell us it doesn't exist at the same time, often in the same sentence. So we are collecting stories of cotton sealing, rape survivors. So if it's your case, feel free to use the website in terms of recording your own story. You can also use the website to share it. It's a resource as well. Mm-hmm. So
we've shared it on the WLRN
thank you very much.
Facebook page, and we'll continue to share it. And I'm sure when we post this interview, there'll be a link to it in the right up beneath it.
That would be really. It's very simple. So we are visible on social media, and we try to address it this way as well, and we hope that there's going to be enough evidence that it can't be dismissed anymore, because it's really important. And this is happening again, in the LGBT, the organization that are supposed to protect us, who are actually gaslighting us to, accept men. So that's one of the big thing we are doing at the moment. Mm-hmm. And then, talking about Lesbian Visibility, we also run this little side project on the Get the Hell Out page, which is called Lesbian Newsflash. And what we want to do with this is to, do exactly that, just bring some lesbian news. It's very kind of, how can I say that? It kind of comes when it comes. Like if there's lesbian with stories and they have got project and so on, we come and interview them. We hope to go and interview them in real life if we can as well, or them doing live stuff, because it's really important to give ourselves this visibility. And one day or 1 week a year for Lesbian Visibility Week, it's just not enough, and we want to promote lesbian work, basically.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah. So I've been speaking with Angela Wild of Get the Hell Out UK and Lesbian Me Too. And it's been a pleasure, Angela. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thistle, so much. It was a really lovely chat.
Thanks for tuning in to another WLRN extended interview. Please like, comment, and share widely, sisters.